Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Today I wanted to focus on your aim in Battlefield RedSec Battle Royale, because obviously you're probably not winning gunfights if your aim is not on point. You might get some lucky shots here and there, but there's a lot of things you can do in Battlefield right now to really optimize your aim, whether it be adjusting a few settings that we're going to talk about or focusing on some things in your actual gameplay that can have a pretty big impact on it as well. So as we do go through all the tips, all the things you want to look out for here today, if you enjoy the video, you find the information helpful, a like rating is always seriously appreciated. And if you're new to the channel, you want to ensure you're always in the know for everything going on in Battlefield, this is the place to be. So feel free to hit that subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. So first up here, if you've been playing Battlefield 6 multiplayer prior to RedSec, you're probably well familiar with this sort of gunfight experience here, but tap firing versus full auto is going to make a massive difference in your gunfights, especially over range here. Up close, you can get away with it a little bit more, going full auto, the target's going to be bigger. If you're running into spread, it's not going to be as drastic as when you're looking at, 40, 50, 60 meter fights. But a lot of the time, if you are using a weapon and it's got a decent amount of recoil, the KTS here is a largely easy weapon to use. But if you're going full auto, you're going to notice that the spread, when your bullets are going out left to right, not really staying in a consistent pattern, that's going to happen more and more as you continue to hold down the trigger and spray a weapon. Whereas if you're tap firing, things are going to be a lot more accurate over time. And if you just shoot off 4, 5, 6 shots back to back to back and sort of burst fire or tap fire in some cases, you can even go tap, 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 tap. It's going to be a way more accurate experience there. Now, of course, you got to get used to that muscle memory, when to do it, when not to do it, and, sort of recentering in some cases where some weapons might have a little bit more recoil. But tap firing and really forcing that into your gameplay is going to make a massive difference in how accurate your guns are. The devs are pretty adamant about really enforcing that tap fire experience for ranged fights, and it's going to be even more valuable here in the future when they continue to adjust bloom and, how weapon behavior and recoil and everything with future updates here. So that's definitely something you want to try and integrate as much as possible. I also want to talk a little bit about some attachments you want to look out for here when it comes to accuracy. There's a few things here that are obviously going to be very big. First up here are the heavy and then also the heavy extended barrels. You'll notice that when you go through and you read the description of these, they're going to improve accuracy over extended periods, which means basically as you are spraying full auto, the weapons will be a bit more accurate. There won't be as much spread. So that's a huge safety net if you're someone who does find themselves just spraying and praying consistently. These aren't available on every single gun, but the heavy or the heavy extended barrels are really, really useful in those situations. Obviously, you have a lot of options in your muzzles here for better control, whether it's something a little bit more straightforward, not as much recoil control like a long suppressor or a lightened suppressor. Each of these will offer some reduced recoil buildup and improved recoil recovery. So tap firing with these is going to be a little bit more accurate, but it's not going to do as much for your control as something like a compensated break would, a linear comp would, but these will also show you on the radar when you're shooting. So you have to find that balance of, are you comfortable with the gun's recoil while using a suppressor? Great. If so, you're going to be set. If you're not comfortable with the gun and how the recoil behaves and you have to use a compensator, you got to be mindful you will be showing up on the radar there. But really what you want to look out for here is other attachments like some of the underbarrels in specific that actually end up hurting your accuracy in certain situations. Some will say they'll hurt accuracy while simply just aiming down sights. That to me doesn't seem like a huge deal from my experience testing a lot of these. I don't notice a massive difference in my spread when I'm using something like a 6H64. However, there's also other options here that do end up giving you worse accuracy while moving when ADS. So if you're doing a lot of strafing, that's going to be sort of stacking on top of the already worse strafe effects and strafe spread that you get because of just the gameplay mechanics that Battlefield has integrated there. So certainly something you want to be mindful of. Really look out for those different attachments that say they're going to hurt accuracy in certain cases. Those are ones that typically you want to be careful with given what your weapon setup is ultimately going to be. And if it's something you're doing a lot of strafing with, if it's something you're approaching a certain way in gunfights, those can end up helping you out in some cases because of the better control, but then hurting you in others if you're doing specific movements in game. Now let's talk some aim settings. We'll go over some stuff for controller and then also keyboard and mouse as well. There is still a lot of work in progress being done here, it seems like, because as of the time that I'm recording this video, and if anything changes by the time I get around to posting it, I'll include some post-edit mentions here, but as of the time that I'm recording this, the devs are still going through and adjusting bloom and adjusting spread and weapon behavior and whatnot, a lot of the input stuff as well with how things are feeling with your dead dead zones and everything going on. So a lot of this can change over time, and once it does, we'll probably go through and do like a whole new controller settings video and everything like that. But a few things you want to focus on. Obviously this one's straightforward, but finding an infantry sensitivity that you're comfortable with. A lot of players will probably like something in the middle ground there. If you're too high, then you're going to be too snappy for long range fights. You're not going to be able to stay on target as easily. And if you're too low, you're not going to be able to follow enemies up close fast enough, and they'll be able to get a jump on you there. The things that you want to look out for here initially though, zoom sensitivity coefficient. Typically the standard if you're playing on controller is going to be 178. That's just the math that checks out there, which should be the default value that the game comes with on controller. So stick with that. Other players also do enjoy testing out 0 on controller. I personally cannot tell a difference much when I'm playing on 0 versus 178. On keyboard and mouse, however, I do notice a difference, and I've gone into like sort of this raw input feel here with the settings where my zoom coefficient on mouse and keyboard is now 0, whereas if I switch over to controller, I bump this back up to 178, and that's really important there. Some players also don't love the heavy aim assist slowdown when you are going from target to target, so dropping this down some does give you the chance to potentially be a little bit more accurate or even snappy in some cases. So that's certainly something you may want to experiment around with your gameplay. It's not going to be a one size fits all. Everyone loves 100 and hates 70 or vice versa there, but certainly see if maybe you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable with how snappy your aim is, or if you feel like that slowdown's a little bit too strong and too muddy, lowering this down to something like 70 could be certainly advantageous. Aim input curve, I'm still rocking BF1 and BF4 on console. Sometimes it'll only show up as one versus the other. They're essentially the same here. However, dynamic is also one that's a little bit more S-curve style there, and if you come over from Call of Duty, that might be something you're a little bit more familiar with as well. Whereas if you've been around in Battlefield for some time, BF1 and BF4, the response curves there certainly feel snappy and generally a little bit more smooth than some of the other ones. And then with the acceleration presets, BF4, BF3, BF Bad Company, and then looking at your acceleration, this is what is going to impact a lot of people more than anything else here. This acceleration is going to really determine how floaty or how snappy your movement feels. So if you're trying to quick flip to a target and go left, right, and stay there snappy, you're going to want to lower this value to 10, 12, 16, 18s where I've got mine now. If you want a little bit more floaty movements when you're ADSing and whatnot, and even when you're just generally looking around, then you go through and you want to increase this sum, maybe 50, 60, 70, somewhere in that margin there. But that's really going to determine how snappy or how floaty your aim is going to feel in game. So that's definitely one of the most important settings you can go through and you can adjust there. Another thing you may want to look into is your actual zoom sensitivities here. Some people just like a general universally toned down zoom aim sensitivity. Like for instance, I drop mine to about 84 here when I'm playing on keyboard and mouse and controller. You can also, though, if you want, take this a step further and individually tune the actual zoom optics here. So like your 1x are going to be your basic red dots, sometimes your iron sights. Then you've got your 2x scopes, your 4x scopes, your 10x zoom on snipers. What I like to do in this case, particularly on controller, is actually go through and lower these values down a little bit to a point where I can fine tune and feel a little bit like I'm more in control of precise movements here. So I go down to about a 0.89 or an 89 here on some of the lower zooms, and then I just very gradually increase this as we go up. You don't want a slower zoom on some of these high zoom optics like a 5x, a 6x, a 10x, because then you're not going to be able to keep up with enemies moving from left to right, up and down. You're going to be too zoomed in, and you obviously have to move even more to cover the same amount of ground when you're heavily zoomed in as you would with like a 2x or a 3x. So that's why I gradually increase it there. This is not for everyone though, for what it's worth. Just be mindful of that. Some players, if you just leave all these values at 100, then you've got that universal muscle memory you can build up, and I just recommend changing the zoom aim sensitivity by itself there, leaving everything else as default. But if you're looking to maybe see if this is something that can help out your aim, it's going to be an individual sort of case-by-case basis here. Certainly something I would recommend to see if that maybe helps you feel a little bit more accurate. It's always something I've done here in general. Then another thing you want to focus on controller, for what it's worth, is the tuning here at the bottom. Definitely turning off vibration. Your controller rattling around is probably not going to help you stay super accurate. But then also with your dead zones, especially as they continue to update these because they are so funky and kind of muddy right now, having this axial dead zone at 0 basically right now, and then in the future, maybe once they fix it, you'll be able to adjust it a little bit more precisely there. But essentially figuring out what your stick drift is with your center dead zones across your left and your right stick, and then basically just having one value above that so you're not getting stick drift in unwanted scenarios, but you're also not adding in too much resistance. Like the higher this number, the more resistance is going to be there, and that's not good for your aiming at all. So to sort of counter what's going on here, you want to be mindful of those axial dead zones at the moment, and then just make sure you're not going too high on your basic center dead zones there either. And on keyboard and mouse, again, just finding that right sensitivity for you with your preferred DPI. I'm on a 16 sensitivity with about an 800 DPI. And again, once more on mouse specifically, I play on that 0 zoom sensitivity coefficient. Outside of that, though, it's going to be largely the same, application here as what we just talked about on controller with some of the aim sensitivities. For me personally, just slightly lowering these down so I can be a bit more accurate. But that's going to be more of a muscle memory and preference sort of thing at the end of the day. Really, it just comes down to lining up that mouse aim sensitivity with what is going to work well for your space, how large your mouse pad is, or whatever the case is, right? And your preferred DPI. Otherwise, you can apply the same sort of things to look out for as controller. And while we're sitting here talking about these settings, something else to note, and I see a lot of people do this, and ultimately I think they're causing more harm than good, is don't be super like flip back and forth and constantly changing your settings. Commit to something, play with it for a little bit, try and build up some muscle memory, and then if it's still not feeling good after, 4 or 5 matches of gameplay, a few hours of gameplay, then adjust it again. But if you're sitting there expecting instantaneous results on your aim, like if you were to go through and adjust some of these zoom sensitivities, if you tone these down some and the next game you're not immediately snapping to heads on every single gunfight, and you take that as, oh, these settings aren't going to work for me, I got to change it again, well, then you're not giving yourself enough time to actually build up that muscle memory and establish how much you might need to flick to stay on an enemy that's this far away, or what you need to do to control the recoil with that sensitivity. So while yes, I suggest going through and changing your settings to really fine tune things, don't do it constantly. Don't do it on a game by game basis. Otherwise, you're just going to be having a different experience, and it'll be hard to really build up any established control there over where you're aiming, where you're looking, how fast you're getting from point A to point B on your targets. And then lastly here, just another tip I can give you guys, and it's especially convenient with Portal and everything going on there, some of the bot servers that are available, or just even the firing range here, is warm up your aim on the dummies, on the bots. If you're trying to find out sensitivities and you want to try and make sure you've got something that's comfortable for flicking, these bots are a great way to do so. If you know that you can flick easily to the second bot, to the third bot, to the fourth bot, so on and so forth, this is a great way to sort of warm up that feel. It can be applied to controller or keyboard and mouse, or obviously if you want more realistic targets, using Portal, using some of those servers where there's not as much at stake as a real match, can be really beneficial as well, sort of getting the warm-up period in before you're jumping into some games and actually diving in there. So across the board, a couple of really specific things you can do to ultimately really drastically improve your aim experience over the course of time here in Battlefield RedSec. That said, that is going to wrap things up, though. If you guys enjoyed the video, you found it helpful, do me a favor, drop a like on it. And of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, turn on those post notifications on your way out to guarantee you're always in the know for everything going on in Battlefield. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.